afternoon, or morning, wherever you are in the world. So this is our fourth all group session, Aging with Expectation. So today's topic is the courage to claim your unlived life. And it's presented by Stephen Koski, or Dr. Stephen Koski with us today, and myself from the Cairnmillar Institute. So just so you're aware, if you haven't jumped onto the Zoom webinars very often, to get started for the session, we will be recording it. It would be great if people have any questions, please do ask them. There's a little chat signal down the bottom, a little chat sign and the talking bubble. You just click on that and it opens up a little window and you can type a message in. Your video and the audio or anything won't be supplied on the recording, so you don't have to worry about that at all, so your name won't be exposed anywhere. And if you can't hear the presenters, just select the audio settings, etc., and look at the sound check controls. So, but otherwise, welcome to today's session, and I'll start off with an acknowledgement to country. So the Cairnmillar Institute acknowledges the traditional owners of the land, as does Bend, Oregon, I imagine, Stephen, in America, and just paying our respects to elders past and present, and the Aboriginal and Indigenous elders of other communities who may be here today. So we extend this respect to all Indigenous peoples from around the world and to any First Nations people who come across the material that we'll be presenting today. So thank you. And I would just like to remind everyone too that some of the inspiration of this series has come from Reverend Dr. or Emeritus Professor Francis Macnab, and we say thank you to him for each of these sessions for his life and legacy. So he certainly inspired these sessions. He was a very gifted man. And he'll be much mourned by people here at Cairnmillar and around him. Stephen was one of those people who knew him very well, and his rich legacy continues in these series of presentations. So from here, I'll hand it over to you, Stephen. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kathryn. Great to be here. Let me begin by acknowledging, as I live in Bend, Oregon, and the original peoples of the land that I currently live were the Paiute Nation, as well as the tribes of Warm Spring. And it's delightful to be here. And today in America is actually, just I'm a day behind you, on the calendar, it's what's called All Saints Day. And it's that day we recognize saints, we recognize those who have rested from are resting from their labor, and there's a phrase where they joined the great company of the saints of light. So I just want to stop and acknowledge Francis Macnab as one of those saints. And acknowledging Francis as one of those saints, I know immediately he would do this with his hand, and he would scoff at the idea of being called a saint. But he certainly profoundly impacted and influenced my life and so many others. So I want to begin with this topic of the courage to claim your unlived life, because I think it's a topic that Francis would have loved. So I want to begin with two quotes. Two quotes of Francis, actually. I remember Francis saying, the challenge is to see our future, particularly as we age, to see our future as a promise and possibility and not a threat. And I think he would say, how you see the future will determine the choices you make today, was a phrase he used a lot. So whether you see the future as a threat or as a challenge and a promise will determine the energy and the spirit by which you live each day. And the other quote of Francis, he said, the gift of these years as we age is not just simply to be alive, but to become more fully alive. And I think that's the challenge with this topic of the courage to claim your unlived life. As we age, there are aspects of life that become diminished. I just worked out today. I realized I don't have as much strength as perhaps I used to have, and I'm not able to run as far as I used to run. So there are certain things that are diminished, but there are certain things that also can be enhanced. There might be an invitation to become more fully alive, and to become more alive in different ways than perhaps we were in the first stages or the first half of our life. So I think part of the challenge is, so what I'd love to do is just introduce this idea of the unlived life. And then what I'd like to do is offer 5 suggestions, 5 ideas that might move us closer to claiming that unlived life and move us closer to a greater sense of wholeness, and maybe perhaps even becoming more fully alive. So the unlived life, it's really looking at the priorities and the commitments that we perhaps didn't find time for in our younger years, or perhaps the years that we were working, spending a lot of energy in pursuing our careers, or pursuing being a parent, or whatever it might be. What are those things that perhaps got ignored, got set aside, that now perhaps are calling for attention? Not only attention, but care. One way to think about it is, there's a writer by the name of Richard Rohr. He says we spend the first half of our life building the container. So a lot of our energy is spent building the container of our lives. But then perhaps we get to our later years and realize those things that make us feel alive, those things that are most important, aren't in the container. So the first half of the life, perhaps our lives we spend building the container. In these later years, as we age, we shift our focus to what do we want inside the container? What's important? What are those values? What are those commitments? What are the things now at this stage in our life that will help us to become more fully alive? Carl Jung said once that the number one reason that most people are in therapy is the repression of their life force. So part of the challenge and the invitation in these later years, claiming our unlived life, is to release our life force. So Carl Jung said, one cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be of little importance in the evening. And what in the morning was true will in the evening have become a lie. There's another author, Robert Johnson, who has another quote that's similar, where he said, well, what worked in the first half of our life is nearly always inadequate for the challenges of our mature years. So I think that's part of the challenge of okay, what served us in our earlier years may not serve us in our later years. So what are those things that will serve us and help us become more fully alive in our later years? I mean, if you think of parents, if you're a parent and you had younger children, and you watched your children outgrow their marbles and their trucks and their stuffed animals, as parents, we really actually don't expect our children to take their toys to university. Or we don't expect them to take their stuffed animals to their first job. We actually expect them to outgrow them, and outgrowing those things that they love is just a natural part of maturation. I think in our later years, there are also some things we outgrow. There are also some things that no longer serve us in the way that they perhaps once served us. Perhaps there are toys that were significant for us at one stage in our life that we've outgrown as we become older. And can we let go of those to make room for kind of an evolution into our more mature years? You know, I talk with a lot of people who, once they retire, it's extraordinary to me. Well, it's not too surprising, but it's not surprising that how many men particularly, but I think that's changing. I think more and more women as well become depressed once they retire, because there is so much energy and so much attention, and so much of their priorities in life are focused on the career, focused on the work that one does, and one's whole identity is wrapped up in who they are as a working person. One sense of success in life is wrapped up in who I am in my job. And when they're not working any longer, they're left, well, who am I? So a lot of our energy and our concentration in the first half of our life, building the container is where we focus on our career, we focus on professional competence, we focus on perhaps achieving financial security, or maybe we become married, we focus on our marriage, having children and a family. And this takes up so much of our time and our energy. And now we're at a different stage in life. So what happens now is I think there is a lot of early interests, a lot of inner qualities, a lot of things that we were passionate about, that in those years where we're building the container, those things go underground, or they become neglected or even forgotten. They kind of recede into our unconscious world. They're kind of still alive, but they're dormant within. So a fundamental part is reclaiming these lost qualities. I think can be one of the most important spiritual tasks of our older years. So I think in this second half of life, we're called, I think, to live everything we truly are, to achieve a greater sense of wholeness. As Francis said, the gift of these years is not just to put in the years. It's not just simply to live. But by chance can we become even more fully alive. So let me breathe, give you a chance, Kathryn. What is your sense of the shift that takes place from these early years when we're building the container to these later years where we're wondering what's in the container? Is anything in the container? Are the things in the container that need to be in the container that will bring us alive?
Thanks, Stephen. Really thought-provoking. I think in terms of reclaiming, lost qualities and things, and your discussion reminds me about the importance of and the role that being on autopilot plays, and during our life, and it's quite a major transition to transition through lives, but it's very safe to be on autopilot. We know day after day what we're going to do and plan and what the idea is. and then transitioning and becoming older, there's room to do other things. And I think that we have to take some things out of the container, though, in order to make room to put new things in. And I think that's part of the challenge here. So I think the autopilot can be something that can be challenged as we've got more time. And I think it possibly starts with a moment of reflection. I can imagine is one of those ways. And think about even some of the things that you would have liked to have done. So you're thinking about your thoughts when you were much younger and what you might have liked to do. Did you like bike riding, for example? Is that something that I might like to do now? So I think it's a bit of a challenge to think, what do I let go of to bring in some new things and put some things into the container? Because what's in your container now isn't or may not be fit for purpose anymore. So I come back to your point, Stephen, earlier about having a purposeful thought around what it is that you want to put into that container. Have some control in this. What do you want in there? What do you want people to see? What do you want to be doing? What do you want these lashed parts of your life to represent? So that's kind of what it means to me, Stephen.
I love that. You use the word reflection. And I think how important it is to make space and to make opportunities to reflect and to listen and to pay attention. I mean, what are those hidden gifts? What are those unused potentials? What are those dreams that got put aside that are now calling out for attention? And I think this invitation actually takes a lot of courage, because it really it means, and you just mentioned it means acknowledging that perhaps some of those things that served us at one stage in our life are no longer serving us, or at least maybe no longer needed to successfully navigate the next stage of our lives. So this time in our lives can be a call for profound change, because there might be an invitation to release some of those old ways, and change is never easy. And I've often noticed, even in my own life, that depression can accompany this particular stage. But I'm even wondering if we can kind of reflect and reframe depression around this whole idea that maybe it can be actually a doorway into a new spiritual awakening. I mean, I think of my own life. When if I take a moment to address my own unlived life, to think about maybe what I sacrificed, what I set aside, what I buried, what I neglected, to arrive at where I am now in my life. And if I'm honest, with honest reflection, I realized that I poured a lot of what I would call my gold, my priorities, my energy, quite frankly, into my career. That I realized that if I'm honest, that I was often motivated by, I think an unconscious desire to be successful, to earn people's approval. And I kind of required other people's affirmation to feel like I was successful. So I poured a lot of energy in being successful. And in the process, I sacrificed a lot. I think in many ways I sacrificed time and intimacy with my family. I think I sacrificed friendships that I realized that most of my friends in that particular stage of building the container, if I reflect on it, most of my friends were related to my work in some way. I love to write, and I love to speak, and that might be kind of obvious that I love to speak, and you can tell me to shut up at any stage because I just get a little carried away. But I love to write and to speak. And I realized as I was building the container, most of my creative writing was related to my work. And most of my speaking that I did was related to my work. And I had very little room, if I'm honest, very little room for hobbies. And I don't think I really knew how to cultivate solitude. And even my speaking was about being successful. So if I was speaking, it would be about those attending this webinar. This is at a former time in my life. As I was building the container, I'd be really worried that you liked what I was saying and that you'd approve of what I was saying, or that, gosh, we need to get more people onto this webinar. And I realized that even in my speaking to build the container, it was geared around being successful. And that served me. I'm not really trying to be negative around that because that actually serves some purposes. But there's also a cost. You know, the cost was, I think, at times not speaking my truth. The cost at times was just kind of avoiding conflict. So even I look at writing and speaking, which were strengths as I built the container, in many ways were liabilities as well. So now I'm at a stage where I'm wondering, how can I look at these things in a different way as I explore my unlived life? I want to honor my past, but I also acknowledge that the way forward looks different than the road that got me to this point in my life. So I'm asking different questions. Like, what might my life look like when I am no longer so goal-driven? What might my life look like if there's not so much energy around my role as a professional? How can I recover intimacy and nurture intimacy with my family? My adult sons now. How can I build a different kind of relationship with them? What do friendships look like? What do friendships look like that aren't connected to my work? What would it be like to be vulnerable? Because in work, you kind of protect yourself. So what would it be like to be vulnerable in friendships? And then I think, reflection, what is calling me now? You know, what deep down is calling and wanting to be expressed now? And can I use some of those gifts that serve me, like writing and speaking, in a different way for this new calling? So before I shift to some suggestions, I want to just invite you, Kathryn, to reflect as well.
Yeah, there's actually a comment in the comment box, and someone's just saying, thank you for your honesty, Dr. Koski, which is a lovely comment, but it's also very relevant because I think honesty is at the heart of this conversation that we're having right now, isn't it, in terms of being honest with yourself. And also, as you said earlier too, about having the courage to embrace the change, but look at it as an opportunity for change as well. And there's another comment in here, and it says, I wonder whether having a dog was part of setting up your container and continues to be part of your present and future. I'm fascinated about the role of dogs rather than pets, which have benefits. Current research highlights that dogs can help us to be pro-social, help with attachments, and improve our well-being. And that's another lovely comment.
Oh, that is so beautiful. That is so thank you for whoever wrote that down. I think about my own. I think I have 2 dogs. And I think about my relationship with my dogs, how that has changed, and how before I'd want to get up really early and walk my dog, exercise my dog, but exercise myself to get ready to go to work. And now I walk my dog and I realize my dog is my spiritual teacher. Because my dog now invites me to stop and to pay attention. And to wait, my dog wags his tail at everybody who passes. My dog can be absolutely fascinated in a stick. And it helps me to reflect on, gosh, the simple things can bring you so much joy. My dog would just jump into the river because we live near a river, so I often take him to walk along the river, and he doesn't hesitate jumping in and getting wet no matter how cold it is. And it helps me to reflect on, gosh, in this next stage of my life, what am I willing to risk? Am I willing to jump in? Where am I cautious? Helen Keller said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Am I willing to embrace that adventure? My dog sometimes will just get on his back and roll on his back and be absolutely silly. And so my dog now, rather than before, my dog walking the dog was go from point A to get to point B as fast as I possibly could. And now my dog invites me. I haven't yet gotten on my back and rolled around in the grass yet, but maybe that's yet to come. But yeah, my dog is my spiritual teacher. That's a great question.
I think that there's also, isn't there, there's in Australia, I don't know if it's the same case in America, Stephen, but we have a lot more dogs and animals coming into our residential care services and things to sort of help people connect. And they're another being, aren't they? They may not be a human being, but they're another being. And I know that earlier when you were talking about what comes, taking things out of the container and putting something in the new container, I know for me there's a lot more about nature and animals that I'll be putting into that container for my later years. And undoubtedly, animals can play a very key therapeutic part of our further development. Yeah.
One of my dogs is an English cream retriever, and he's the best therapy dog. But I think part of this is indicative of, I think the task as we age is to no longer grow up, but to grow deep and become whole. There's a writer by the name of Anne Lamott who says that when we age away from brain and ambition towards heart and soul. So as we build a container, it's a lot about our brain. Not that it's not important to continue to use our brain as we age, but it's a lot about our brain and ambition. And now it's a lot about heart and soul, as Abraham Heschel says. The years of old age may enable us to attain the high values that we failed to sense when we were building the container. The insights perhaps that we missed, the wisdom we ignored, that our aging years actually can be formative years, rich in possibility, to unlearn the follies of a lifetime, to see through inbred self-deceptions, to deepen understanding and compassion, to widen the horizon of honesty, to refine the sense of fairness. I love that. So I want to move to, how can we move towards the heart and soul? How can we kind of move to claim more of our unlived life and live more whole? And there's a few suggestions. And the first suggestion, I'll say just be reckless. Be reckless when it comes to the affairs of the heart. As I like to say, this is the time where we stop chasing our pension and maybe we chase our passion. As we're building our container, the ego has a major role to play. And the primary needs of our ego, the ego craves control. The ego craves security. The ego craves approval. And I think now it's about making space for the soul. And what the soul craves, or what the soul thirsts, is for meaning and depth and purpose and beauty. And maybe not so much success as significance. So I think one of the most important questions to ask at this stage is, what makes you come alive? I love, again, we built the container. So what are the things that we can put in the container now that will make us come alive? As Howard Thurman said, don't ask what the world needs. Ask yourself, what makes you come alive? And go do that. Because what the world needs is more and more people who have come alive. I often say, no one ever died saying, I'm sure glad for the self-centered, self-serving, self-protected life I've lived. Instead, it's like, what helps you come alive? Where do you notice beauty? You talked about nature earlier, how important that is. I think joy and beauty at this stage in our life are forms of resistance. I like to say, when the air is thin, joy and beauty are the oxygen that we need. So, yeah, what's meaningful? What's significant for you? What's beautiful? So be reckless when it comes to the affairs of the heart. Any thoughts on that one?
I think what you're saying in some ways may sound a little bit counterintuitive, because we're often told, aren't we, as we're growing up, to look after others and think about others, and we do things that fill in other people's needs. And I think you're giving us all here some permission, Stephen, to, perhaps this is a time when we might want to prioritise our own things, but it's okay, because we're still maintaining those values, because this is what the world is needing. They're needing some people at times to sort of think about what they need to become alive, and because it certainly also leads on to engagement with community and other things as well, which is a fabulous thing, and where we can learn from each other's wisdom without doing things because we have to do them for work purposes or otherwise. So I think it's a really nice words around having permission to make a change, and it's okay. So, yeah, thank you.
I love how you reoriented that to that sense of how we often are taught to focus on others. And I think what this says to me is, you can't pour from an empty cup. That, yes, I think part of the meaning and the significance is when we pour ourselves into others, when we pour our energies into the world, when we pour our compassion into the world. But you can't pour from an empty cup. So what fills you up? What are those things? I kind of call it wise selfishness. We kind of have to be wise and focus on ourselves to fill our cup so that we can pour into the lives of others. I remembered when my wife was critically ill in intensive care, and I was spending 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. sitting in the corner of her hospital. And finally a nurse said to me, "Stephen, your wife does not need your tired, anxious energy. Your wife needs all the love and strength that you can bring into this room. So you need to go and eat a nourishing meal. You need to go and listen to some inspiring music. You need to go and get a massage. You need to go and do all of the things that will restore you so that you can come back and bring that energy into this room. And that to me was it was so counterintuitive, as you said, for me to leave the room. But in fact, the gift that I was giving was to actually go to leave and fill my cup so I could pour more love into that space. So yeah, so what makes you come alive? The next suggestion is to be a beginner. That, clinging to what you already know, clinging to what you already do well in life, is actually the path to an unlived life. Our Buddhist friends will phrase that in terms of the importance of a beginner's mind, of just being willing to be curious. And in fact, Harvard had a study, they called it the Harvard Longitudinal Study of Adult Development. And the study discovered that continual learning, being a beginner, continuing to expose yourself to new things and being curious, the study said determines the degree to which life will be satisfying to you and the degree to which you will be interesting to others. So be curious. Do you have thoughts on adopting the wide-eyed curiosity of a child as we age?
Yeah, I think this is, what this reminds me of is a phrase that they use in education called lifelong learning. And it's, we learn very obvious when we're in primary school and high school, and then we do learning because we want a job or a particular vocation, then we might do some more study and learning because we want to get a promotion and things. But this is like, be a learner, but be a learner for you, for the new things that you want to be putting into your container. So I think in terms of a place to start, I think this is a really good place. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, one of the things that has kind of brought me alive. I mean, I've lived my life, a lot of my life. One of the roles I play is I'm a Christian pastor. I am kind of, and I've dabbled in other religions because I certainly, as a Christian pastor, I'm not one of these Jesus is the only way to God kind of people. I'm eager to learn from other faiths and from other paths. But I realized I only knew a little bit. I kind of only dabbed. I only kind of dipped my toe. And so particularly as the kind of conflict unfolds in the Middle East, I have just poured myself into all that I could learn about that conflict, all that I can learn about Judaism, all that I can learn about Islam. It's kind of brought a new, what it's done is it's enriched my own faith. So yeah, be a beginner. The other part, just the other thing I want to mention about being a beginner is Abraham Heschel again said the goal in life is to live your life with radical amazement, taking nothing for granted. And I think about, again, that wide-eyed curiosity of a child where everything's new, everything's interesting. And just that sense of curiosity. And I'm wondering about the courage to claim the unlived life is the courage to claim that child, that wide-eyed curiosity. And I think of the sacredness of life, that we don't administer the sacred. We uncover it. We discover it. We awaken to the sacred. And so I think that's part of it as well, is recognizing there's so much gift around us. And waking up in the morning and not, sipping that cup of coffee and taking time to actually taste it and to smell it and to not take anything at all for granted. And the next suggestion is hard for me, but it's to accept your imperfect, flawed self. And I think particularly so much for so many people, their acceptance of themselves is often related to the work that they did or the work that they do. So my kind of acceptance of who I am as a person somehow is equated with the work that I do. And I think part of the challenge is to find acceptance apart from the work that we do, and to just accept ourselves as ourselves. I have an autoimmune disease called ankylosing spondylitis. And because of this particular disease, I live with chronic pain. And for the longest time, I viewed my body, for example, as something to overcome, as something to defeat, as something to wrestle into submission. And I realize now as I age, I'm coming to a different relationship with my body. I was in a yoga class. Now, there was a time when I go to a yoga class and I'd look at the person next to me and I think I would try to compete and I would try to stretch as far as that person could stretch. But when I go to a yoga class, everyone around me looks like a pretzel and I look like a Polish sausage. I don't stretch very well because of the limitations of my body. But yoga is one of the most important things I can do for my body. And I had the most brilliant yoga teacher. I think she could tell that I was comparing myself to others. And she could tell I was trying to stretch myself beyond my capacities. And she moved alongside of me. And she said to me, she just said, work with your body, not against your body. Breathe compassion into that next stretch, not effort. And I was like, wow. So the way I think about it, and a shift that has happened for me, as I age and as things hurt a little bit more, that to me, it's this runaway train that's heading in one direction, and that direction is degeneration. And for the longest time, I was angry about the train that I was on. I'm talking mostly about this particular disease that I have. And everybody has their thing. Everybody has their limitation. Everybody has their imperfection. Everybody's dealing with something. But for the longest time, I was fighting it, and I was angry. I didn't want it. I don't want to be on this train. I don't want your ticket. And then I realized, well, it's the train I'm on. But there are things that I can do to love myself and to love my body that will slow the train down. I can't change the direction it's going, but I can change its speed. I can slow it down. And I can actually choose the seat that I'm going to sit on this train. And I can actually look out and appreciate the view as I go. I can actually notice the people who've chosen to be on the train with me and who are a support on the train, and express gratitude and appreciation for them as well. So Parker Palmer is a writer who said, wholeness is the goal, but wholeness doesn't mean perfection. Wholeness means embracing brokenness as an integral part of your life. So that's, I think, a key to the courage to claim our unlived life, is to just embrace our imperfect, flawed, broken self. Do you have thoughts on that?
Thank you, Stephen. There's an area of psychology called rational emotive therapy, a type of psychology, and one of the learnings from that and their worldview is that it's irrational to think that you can be perfect and perfect at everything. And of course, as we're growing up and developing, we get rewarded for being perfect. So we often strive for that perfection. It's part of how we're wired. But gosh, doesn't it take a lot of time to also plan and to try and be perfect? It takes a lot of time and energy. And I think what I'm hearing you say, Stephen, that if we let go of some of that perfection, not only are we forgiving ourselves for not being perfect, but it's actually okay not to be perfect, and actually practicing a little bit more self-compassion, replacing that perfection. But I often think it's our imperfections that make us different. So that idea of embracing our imperfections is really important. It's where some of our learnings sit. It's where some of the wisdom comes, and over time, and transitioning into older age, you're probably collecting quite a few pearls of wisdom along the way as well from your experiences that make us whole. So I really like this conversation, Stephen. I think it's really helpful.
I love what you say about wisdom. Actually, wisdom can come from imperfection. I have in my office at work, I have a quote on the wall that says, "Light reflects off jagged edges of a broken bottle as much as light reflects off the diamond." And I think that's a good reminder. And another suggestion is to take on big jobs that are worth doing. Earlier I said, don't chase your pension. Chase your passion. And I think as we take on these big jobs, there's a difference, though. There's a difference I want to highlight. As we take on these big jobs worth doing, that I think it's about changing the criteria of evaluation and success. That it's important not to be seduced by the first half of life's measure of effectiveness. You're only effective if you produce this, if you achieve this, if you accumulate this. And I often view this of shifting the idea of being successful to instead just being faithful. So the goal isn't to necessarily be successful, but just being faithful to the gifts that you have. Being faithful to your own sense of inner calling. Even being faithful to the needs of the world that are within your reach. I like to say, you can't fix the world. We can't fix the world. But we do change the world. We change the world by our mere presence in the world. We change the world every moment of every day, just by being in the world. So the question is, well, what kind of change? Can we be a little bit more intentional about that? So we can't fix the world, but perhaps we can mend the torn fabric that is within our reach. So what is that within our reach? There's a beautiful writer by the name of Glennon Doyle. I highly recommend her writing. I'm trying to remember her most recent book, something about a cheetah, or can't remember it, but she's a beautiful writer, and she said, you can't fix the world, but the very least you can do is put away your damn grocery cart. So I love that. What is that grocery cart for us? One way I think about it in terms of as we age, that when you live for yourself, you just get old. And everybody gets old. But if we live in such a way that we're building a world where our children and our grandchildren and their children, perhaps not even yet born, can flourish, then you become a wise elder. The world is full of people who just simply get old. The world doesn't have nearly enough wise elders. So any thoughts on taking on big jobs that are worth doing?
And being a wise elder. So
Yeah.
I think definitely. I think that what you're saying, it's really sounding like you just need to be really true to yourself, and that will show to others as well. And I think too, just it kind of really encapsulates that whole journey that we've talked about today in terms of cutting off autopilot and being open to doing something new or differently. You know, reflection and meditation on things that you might have liked to have done more of. But of course, there are some things that we need to do less of to make time for those things we want to do more of. And then taking on those big jobs, and they don't have to be big like this, I imagine, Stephen. They could be big like this, but just big and achievable. And I think that sounds very realistic and whole. So thank you very much for that.
No, I think it's really back to, and I love the fact you brought us back to reflection, because it's really about reflecting on the things that are worth doing, and also the things that are no longer worth doing. It's remembering that the things that are most important in life are always at the mercy of the things that are least important in life. So those least important things can crowd out that thing that is worth doing. So it's that reflection. You know, what is calling out to you at this stage in your life? Making space to pay attention to that. And then, what does it mean to be faithful to that call? Not necessarily successful, but just show up each day and just be faithful to that call. Which in some ways leads us to the last suggestion, which is daily keep death before your eyes. And that might sound just a tad morbid, but if you think about it, it really isn't. If you hold a healthy awareness of your own mortality, of the fact, or all of our mortality, I think it opens our eyes to the grandeur and glory of life. That we recognize that, you know, every breath we have, sheer gift. Every heartbeat, none of us are guaranteed the next one. Sheer gift. It's back to that radical amazement. It's back to don't take anything for granted. And I think that's what daily keeping death before our eyes helps us to not take the gifts that are in front of us for granted. I mean, the task again, as Francis kind of reminded us, it's not just to live, but to fully live each day and each moment. I'm gifted the sacred opportunity. I spend time each week, every week. I am generally invited to move alongside people near the end of their lives. And I have yet to hear someone talk to me about their job or their achievements or their awards or their dream vacation or their cars. Without exception, they talk to me about who they love and who loves them. And if there are regrets, they often say, I just wish I would have forgiven more easily. Or I just wish I would have loved a little bit more extravagantly. So I think daily keeping death before our eyes just kind of reminds us of, again, what's most important. Back to the container. It's just making sure that the things that are most important are in that container. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one of my takeaways from what you were saying too is not to put off what it is that you want to be doing. Because if you've got death before your eyes, then if you put it off, you may never get to that point. So it's worthwhile to perhaps bring forward some of the things on your wish list for you, and which will benefit other people around you. That I think, to finish up, getting towards finishing for today, I think that's one of my takeaways. So,
it's back to that question of what makes you come alive again, which I'd love to finish. And thank you for this conversation. It's always a joy. These sorts of things make me come alive. But I want to finish with one of my favorite quotes of all time by Diane Ackerman, which I think kind of just summarizes all that we talked about, where she said, "The great affair, the love affair with life, is to live as variously as possible, to groom one's curiosity like a high-spirited thoroughbred, to climb aboard and gallop over the thick, sun-struck hills every day. When there is no risk, the emotional terrain is flat and unyielding. And despite all its dimensions, valleys, pinnacles, and detours, life will seem to have none of its magnificent geography, only a length. Life begins in mystery, and it will end in mystery. But what a savage and beautiful country lies in between." So again, thank you. Great to spend this time with you.
thank you to share that saying, Stephen. Very much appreciated. Thank you for today's discussion and leading this discussion. It's been very, very inspiring and also very practical and helpful. As with all of these sessions, we would love to know how we're doing. We have some feedback, or we'd appreciate some feedback from you. If you go into the chat button on your computer, you're welcome to access a little survey there that asks how we go. But Stephen, Koski and myself also welcome feedback directly, and you'll see on that slide that we've also got our email addresses there. And anything in the future that you'd like us to talk about, we welcome the topics and things to come also. So hopefully you enjoyed today. Certainly we welcome feedback, and don't be afraid to open up the chat box and put some thoughts into there or access the survey. So thank you. And also one thing too, that we do offer these sessions for free, and that's quite okay, but we also do welcome you to also consider Carnmillar's. We've got the Big Tent project that Francis Macnab started over 30 years ago, which is quite profound to think that somebody has started a program 30 years ago and it is still going on today. And we have 3 sessions going around Melbourne now at the moment, and working with people who are looking after children who have been experiencing trauma. So feel welcome. If you'd like to donate to the Big Tent, you're welcome to, but you certainly aren't obliged to. So we just thought we'd bring it to your attention. So thank you very much for today. Really appreciate it, and we hope you see you next time. And next time's discussion is on the topic of loneliness. So thank you very much. Have a lovely day. Thank you, Stephen, as always. Wonderful discussion. So thank you all. Thanks, everyone.